Hi everyone and welcome. Jenny Marples here from pushingtherightbuttons.blogspot.com. Back today to share a flip through video for this Tim Holtz Collage mini book. I've shared the cover for this already on my Instagram and Facebook pages, but I promised a flip through, so I'm back with that today so I can show everything in more detail and also answer the questions that have already been raised about it. So let's start with the actual cover itself for this mini book. You'll see here from flipping it over that it's actually double-sided, and to start with I've used some of Tim Holtz's baseboard frames. They come in a set like this. They're made of a really durable, sturdy chipboard and are all covered with vintage images of frames. And I have a couple of these sets, so I used the two identical frames, you can see here, and I then used those as the basis of the covers. And I've covered each of them in, you can see this is a textile surface. I actually used some of Tim's textile surfaces which have a sticky back to them, and just stuck that on top of the collage frames, trimmed it back to match the size of the frames themselves, and then added some white gesso, just a little bit over the top and across the edges, just to give a bit of a worn look, and also added a little bit of vintage photo distress ink over there. So that was very simple. Once I'd made the two covers there, what I then did was stretched some calico fabric in between the two of them, onto which I then stitched the signatures inside, and I'll show you those in more detail shortly. So with that all in place, what I was then able to do was actually cover the inside of these frames to create the aperture inside. And here is what the untreated surface looks like. Now, how I went about this, I took some plain cotton calico, 2 pieces, and I sandwiched it together with some copy paper inside, glued it all together, left it until it was nice and dry, and that kind of formed a nice sturdy layer. I then ran that through with Tim Holtz 3D embossing folder. This one is the Botanical embossing folder. You'll see as I open it up, it's beautiful, thick, deep embossing there. Love this folder. So I ran the fabric through to get the initial indentations, and then if I flip back through, you can see here that there's some colour applied. Very easy to do that. I used some distress paint, some Victorian velvet distress paint, and I brayed over on one of the surfaces. You'll see that there is the surface which is the raised surface, and then there's an indented surface which is the matching one on the other side, and that actually has a flat layer on top. And I simply brayed the paint over the top, slipped my fabric back onto the embossing folder, closed shut, ran it through my Big Shot, and then opened up, and when I took the fabric off, there it was with the paint actually in place. Now do make sure that once you've done that process that you wash any paint off your embossing folder so that you can keep that in a really good condition and usable for future projects. I then added some highlighting to this layer by running some distress paint, some picket fence distress paint over with my brayer onto the raised areas. So that now means that I've got 3 colours on here. I've got the Victorian velvet at the bottom, I've then got the basic calico colour coming through there, and then just some highlights in white, and that was all there was to it. So I stuck down the fabric with the painted side showing through the aperture on both sides, and that created the cover. You'll see I've then embellished with, there are various die cuts on here using some of the papers that I've used inside to do the collaging. So there's little bits of offcuts of distress oxided paper, some painted paper, I've got book page and all sorts of things using the funky florals die sets, 1, 2 and 3, just added some random ones of those and layered them up with some botanical collage layers. And also there's a metal butterfly on here. This is a butterfly, an adornments butterfly from Tim Holtz. And somebody did ask whether it was a die cut. No, it's actually metal, which is great because then I've been able to add picket fence distress paint over the top, and then a drop of shell pink alcohol ink from Ranger onto that to add a little bit of colour. And then to show the detail back up again, I simply went over with a black Sharpie pen on the raised areas so that that detail would show through. And then up in the corner I've added some Tim Holtz design tape, and I've also added remnant rub, and there's also a clipping sticker. When I'm talking about the design tape, the ones I mean are Tim's Ideaology design tapes. This one was from the Remnants collection. I've used some remnants, I've used other bits and pieces as well. These tapes are lovely actually, and you'll see I've used them throughout. And they are a lovely lightweight but very sticky, and you're able to use those, and because they're slightly translucent you can still see the layers that are going on underneath, and they're great because they stick to just about any surface that you want to. If for any reason any of them lift a little, all you need to do is just add a dab of Distress Collage medium. I tend to use the matte one for that. So well worth investing in these. They actually all coordinate beautifully with Tim's Ideaology Memoranda Paper Stash collection. So well worth looking out if you haven't seen them before. Okay, so let's get on to the pages themselves, and you'll see with each page I've actually stitched these pages in place, and then I've wrapped some embroidery thread, or embroidery floss I believe it's called in the US, wrapped that around, and you'll see on the spine here that where I've stitched the signatures into place on the piece of calico underneath, I've then wrapped this floss around just so that that is all disguised and it looks far neater on the edges. So the pages themselves, there's some blank pages in here as well as some collage pages. The blank pages are very easy to reproduce. I've taken pages from a very cheap notebook. You can buy like 3 for £1, 3 for $1, and pull them apart, chop them down to size, and then I've soaked them in a mix of hot water and a couple of drops of walnut stain distress ink re-inker. And once they've been soaked a little while, just a minute or so, just to get some of that colour into them, I've then just allowed them to dry on my washing line, and once they're dry, inked around the edges with some Vintage Photos Distress ink, and that's it, they're ready to go. Really easy to do. So there's some blank pages in here, and having stitched these to a flexible piece of fabric, you can see these now lie flat, which is great if you actually want to write onto your book. And then we're moving to some of the collages. Now throughout the book I have used a couple of things consistently, the first of which is some of these layers. This collection is called the Collector set. Again, Tim Holtz, and they come in a pack with lots of different designs, lots of different colours. They're all different bits of vintage ephemera and pages and tags and all sorts of things, and they are great fun for using for collaging. You can stamp onto them, ink onto them, and you'll see I've used them throughout. Actually, I've added a little bit of gesso onto one of those, and you can also chop them down as well if you want something which is slightly smaller. The other layers that I've used, I mentioned them earlier, are the Botanical Layers. So this is a mix of flora and fauna, and again, great for inking the edges, chopping them down to size, and layering those up with your collages. Makes it very, very quick and simple. So you'll see on here that I've added one of those collage layers from the Collector series and some botanical, added a bit of design tape in here, a little bit of stamping, some more of those clippings. Here's some rub-ons, some remnant rubs, and there's a die cut flower just from a piece of plain spare white card, another piece of just offcut of card which is covered in aged mahogany distress paint, and I've got throughout some of this, I'd got some vellum that was an antique linen colour, and I think you'll see there as I lift it up, it really takes the embossing from the Botanical 3D Embossing Folder beautifully. This is a great way to use up all of those scraps, and people ask about using up their tags. What should they use them for? It's great for adding into notebook pages and creating a little bit of a feature throughout. So again here I've got a spare offcut of inked paper which I then stamped onto and foiled. Just lift that up so you can kind of see the shine a little, and then added another of the collector layers. There's a photo booth image, some die cut florals, again it's the funky florals, and some stickers from the Small Talk Snarky set, and a little bit more vellum, and there's stitching as well throughout. I've just added in that stitching and just left some of these layers loose. This second one here, I've used one of those layers and stamped on top. I mentioned that you could, and I've stamped using the Stampers Anonymous Tim Holtz collection. This one is Inventor 1, and it's got that beautiful typewriter and also the clock, which I've used later. Now I've stamped this using the Tim's stamp platform because then you can stamp, paint over to add that metallic finish to the typewriter, then re-stamp, getting the perfect overlay so that the image doesn't become blurred, and that works really, really well. A bit more stitching in there, a little bit more design tape. These words come from the Theories set of Tim Holtz stamps from Stampers Anonymous. We've seen a lot of the blackout images, which are great fun to use, but actually the words are ideal as well. Great sorts of things for adding into mini books, journals, your planners, that kind of thing. So yeah, I would highly recommend those. So that's the next page, and you'll see just an index clip there. I kept the metallic embellishments, the metal embellishments, to a minimum actually through this book, because obviously I've got the blank pages for people to be able to write onto and didn't want them to be too lumpy in the finished end. Now here we have another of those collector layers, and I've stamped. This is using the Entomology set. Again, I know this has been a real favourite since its launch. Lots of bugs and butterflies, and also that text background which I use on a page later on, and we'll show you there. Again, it's been stamped with metallic paint added and then re-stamped to give that shine to the finished look. And another clipping in there, and in the background here you'll just spot a little bit of design there. That's actually some of the worn wallpaper. You can change the colour of that very easily to coordinate by just adding a little bit of distress ink, in this case again the vintage photo, and that will coordinate beautifully. And then also you'll notice that there's some stenciling on there just using Ranger's texture paste, and I've used one of Tim's layering stencils here, which I love because it adds the feel of as though you've used stitching but without you actually needing to go and get your needle and thread out. So that's great. So a couple more blank pages, and then we've got another collage here. I've got some vintage botanical reference paper that's come from a French book, and then added a layer. There's another of those Theories sayings. I've stamped it onto a piece of paper which I'd covered in aged mahogany distress oxide and allowed that to react with water, and then have chopped it up and used it. You'll see it later on as well. Again, there's some more of that worn wallpaper. It takes on a totally different look if you add a little bit of gesso, and if you then go over with your inks as well, you can see it really makes much more of a vintage feel to it, even more so than the wallpaper itself. Okay, so then moving on, again we've got some more stamping on here. So this particular set is Tim Holtz Inventor 3, which includes those mannequins and also the scissors in here as well. And all I've done with stamping that is stamp directly onto the page, and then I've re-stamped and stamped that onto the worn wallpaper again and cut those bodices out to layer over them. And then you'll see here we've got more of that vellum, more of the snarky stickers, the design tape and the funky floral die cuts. And on this side, again, more of the same, more of those layers. There's a little bit of collage paper there, so that's the collage paper that the black and white botanical version. I haven't coloured it this time, just stuck it straight on, just a little added detail. And then there's remnant rubs included here with the design tape. And then moving over, this, I've used some vintage music paper that was in my stash, added a collector layer over. This is a die cut from the Tim Holtz Wildflowers set, and just used that over the top of another photo booth picture. And then we've got some clipping stickers there and more pages. Here's where I mentioned again about using the Inventor set with the clock and repeating that stamping with the metallic finish. And there's some more of those theories words, and another of the layers, another of the photo booth pictures, some more of that vellum, some more of the worn wallpaper, the design tape and the clipping stickers. And then on this side, here's that stamping. You remember I said from the Entomology set, the script in the background, and I stamped onto an unused piece of altered card. That's gesso with distress ink over the top, and added another of the collector layers, another of the snarky stickers, some more worn wallpaper, an offcut of painted paper, and then this particular funky floral die cut I've cut from Tim Holtz metallic craft stock. It's the gold one. I've added a little dash of black paint and then a couple of drops of the shell pink alcohol ink, and that kind of gives it more of a rose gold look, which works really well. And then we'll move over to, this is the last of the collaged papers. So this one has another of those collector layers, and it's got that Distress Oxide aged mahogany paper in the background. And then I've stenciled over, and this time I've used another of Tim's layering stencils here with the texture paste. Gone through, and actually to make sure that the colour remained light, I've then gone over with picket fence distress paint on the top of it, added some more design tape, some more vellum, and you'll see the Entomology stamping here. And because it had the date March 14th on this diary page, I then added in words Brave Legacy and Remember This, just as a reminder to that particular date. And then we've just got some last pages there for journaling in, the back cover, and then that's it. Okay, hope you've enjoyed this flip through. I'll be sharing some still photos and some more details, including whereabouts you can get the different products from, because obviously I've chatted about those quite briefly in here, and I'll put that out so that everyone can see. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, make sure you subscribe to my subscribe button, and I shall see you soon.